Illustrator paths or outlines are imported into 3ds Max as a line object or an editable spline. I'll select that, and you can see it's an editable spline or line. And we have all the same tools that we saw in the last few movies. For example, we could go into spline subobject mode and change the kerning or the scaling of the letters and so on. So I'll do that. I'll go into editable spline subobject mode. And let's maximize that front viewport with Alt-W. And if I click on one of the letters, you'll notice that the whole letter will be selected in red. Some of the letters are built out of two splines. Like the K here is actually two splines. Let's say I want to make that K larger than the rest of the letters. Then I can Control select both of those and go up to the Scale tool, select in Uniform Scale. And if we want to scale both of those together as a unit, then we want to choose the appropriate transform center up here. The default is actually use pivot point center, which is going to do this. It's going to scale each one of those around its own center. I don't want to do that, so Control Z to undo, and then go in here and choose use selection center, which is the middle button. And now I can scale both of those up equally. I can Control Z to undo that. Maybe I want the E to be scaled up by the same amount. I'll Control select that, and then I can scale them both up a bit. They are going to move away, but that's okay because we can fix that. Go back to the Move tool and then position these. Maybe take these, move those over, and make it a more interesting logo here. Okay, so any of the edits that we could do to an editable spline, we could do here on our text object. Now let's make it renderable and turn it into 3D. I can bomb out of spline subobject mode and go over to the perspective view, Alt-W, and select that. And right at the very top of the Modify panel is a rendering rollout. Open that up, and then we can enable the rendering of that spline in the renderer or in the viewport. Right now, if we tried to render this object to create an image from the object, then we would just get a black screen. But if we turn on Enable in Viewport, we get some geometry. It's looking kind of strange, but we can fix that. We have the thickness here. I'm going to set that thickness down to something really low, like 0.01 inches. And now when I deselect it, you can see we've got some tubes here. Cool. So let's crank that up a little bit, maybe 0.05 inches. And that will display in the viewport, but it won't render unless we also enable rendering. Select it and turn on Enable in Renderer. And right now, we're using the same settings for both. In other words, when I change these parameters down here, it's going to change how the object is going to display both in the viewport and in the renderer. Pretty cool. And we can still, of course, do all the same editing that we did before. We can select these sub-object types and move them around and play with them. Let's do that just with use pivot point center and then move only in X here just to change that distance. And that's how we can make splines renderable both in the viewport and in a production rendering.